I drove along the winding country road, the scenery outside the window becoming both familiar and strangely distant. Towering oak trees lined both sides of the road, their intertwining branches whispering secrets of the past. The radio played an old song from the 80s, its melody stirring a bittersweet sense of nostalgia within me. "Do you remember that amusement park?" Thomas's message still lingered on my phone screen. A simple string of words, yet it pulled me back over 20 years in an instant. That place, our childhood paradise, now long forgotten, like an island adrift in a dream, sinking into the depths of memory. As children, we spent countless summer evenings in that amusement park. The carousel, the haunted house, the Ferris wheel, it had been a place of laughter and adventure. But as time passed, the park shut down. Our parents forbade us from going near it, citing disrepair, but we all knew there was another reason, one no one wanted to talk about. I took a deep breath, placed my phone back onto the dashboard, and tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, a faint unease creeping into my chest. I wasn't sure why, but something told me this trip wasn't just about nostalgia. When I arrived at the meeting spot, Anna was already there, standing with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the direction of the amusement park. She looked just as she had in her childhood, her hair neatly tied back, her face adorned with that same restrained smile. I stepped out of the car, and we exchanged an awkward hug. Despite the years that had passed, we felt like strangers. "Where are the others?" I asked. "Thomas went to grab some drinks. Eric is still on his way. Christian, he probably won't come." Anna hesitated for a moment, her voice lowering. "He doesn't want to come back here." I nodded, a weight settling in my chest. I understood Christian's reluctance. Our childhood memories weren't all pleasant. Before long, Thomas emerged from his car, holding a few bottles of beer, his trademark grin plastered across his face. "Hey, guys. Can you believe it? This place is still here," he said, motioning toward the amusement park in the distance. I followed his gaze. The amusement park stood silently in the twilight, its metal structures glinting faintly under the last rays of sunlight. To my surprise, it appeared untouched by time. The Ferris wheel still towered over the park, the colorful carousel was slowly spinning, and neon lights flickered as if the place had never been abandoned. We hesitated for a moment before stepping past the rusted iron gate. As it creaked open, a familiar scent wafted toward me, cotton candy, popcorn, and the faint tinge of machine oil. But something wasn't right. This park had been abandoned for years. None of this should exist. I stood frozen, staring at the familiar red and white carousel, my chest tightening with an inexplicable unease. It was still turning, its music drifting softly through the air, just like it had all those years ago. And then, in the blink of an eye, I saw something. A shadowy figure, a child, standing at the edge of the carousel. He wore old, faded blue overalls, his head lowered, black bangs obscuring his face. I blinked. The child was gone. Only the empty carousel remained, its painted horses moving up and down in a rhythmic lull. Maybe I was imagining things, but something felt undeniably off. We ventured deeper into the park. As we passed the haunted house, a chill ran down my spine. Memories resurfaced, one particular summer night when my friends had locked me inside as a prank. I had been trapped in the darkness, crying until I finally found my way out. And that night, I could have sworn I had seen that child too. But the memory was too hazy. I couldn't be sure. Thomas laughed, slapping me on the shoulder. "Don't be scared, Jonas. We're all grown up now." I forced a wry smile and nodded, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at my mind. But as we took a few more steps, something by the Ferris wheel caught my attention, the house of mirrors. I stopped in my tracks, staring at one of the old, weathered mirrors. It didn't reflect us. Instead, a hazy shadow loomed in the glass, as if someone was hiding on the other side, silently watching us. The amusement park lights began to flicker. The cheerful music warped, distorting like an old, damaged cassette tape stuck on replay. And then, I heard it. A child's laughter, light, distant, and chilling. It echoed through the night air, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned around sharply, my heartbeat quickening. The boy in the blue overalls stood in the distance. His face was still obscured, but I could feel it, he was watching us. I swallowed hard and murmured, "We shouldn't have come back." "Well, since we're here, we might as well split up and take a look around," Thomas suggested, waving a hand dismissively, though I caught the faint tremor in his voice. "It's more exciting that way, right?" I wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed in me to stay together. But then I saw Anna's hesitant gaze, the way she was caught between doubt and an old, ingrained habit. We had played hide-and-seek in this place countless times as children, and even now, despite the unease curling in my chest, it was hard to break away from that past. Thomas shot me a mischievous grin. "Jonas, don't tell me you're still scared of the haunted house?" I was silent for a moment, my eyes drifting toward the looming, blackened structure in the distance. The haunted house had barely changed, it stood there, worn and unmoving, as if mocking my fear. Childhood terror never truly fades, it lingers, waiting for the right moment to resurface. "It's fine. I'll go," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Let's look around and meet back at the ticket booth." The others nodded and set off in different directions. I took a deep breath and made my way toward the haunted house. With every step, my heartbeat grew louder, each footfall dragging me deeper into the shadows of my past. The wooden door groaned as I pushed it open. Dust swirled in the air, mixing with the musty scent of decay and rotting wood. The dim, flickering lights cast jagged shadows on the peeling walls. Fake skeletons dangled from the ceiling, their hollow eye sockets seeming to whisper among themselves. The wooden floor creaked beneath my weight. My fingers brushed against a crack in the wall, and suddenly, memories rushed back. Back then, we used to challenge each other to stay in the haunted house the longest. It was a test of courage, a childhood rite of passage. I remember getting lost in here once, standing alone at the end of a dimly lit corridor, the air thick with silence. I had heard breathing. And I had seen something, a pale face emerging from the dark. A faint chuckle broke the silence, pulling me out of my thoughts. I spun around, my palms already damp with sweat. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to keep moving. At the end of the corridor, a small door stood ajar, as if inviting me in. Cautiously, I pushed it open. It was a storage room, filled with old, discarded amusement park props. Dust-covered toys lay scattered across the floor, their faded colors muted by time. On the wall, a cracked mirror hung askew. I glanced at it absent-mindedly, and froze. In the mirror, behind me, stood a child. He wore blue overalls, his head slightly bowed, black hair covering half of his face. I spun around abruptly. The room was empty. My breathing grew ragged, my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, I turned back toward the mirror. The child was still there. He hadn't moved. But now, there was something new, a faint, eerie smile creeping onto his lips. "We shouldn't have come back," I murmured, stumbling backward before bolting out of the storage room. When I reached the ticket booth, only Anna was there. Her face was pale, her expression frozen in horror as she stared at the carousel in the distance. I followed her gaze. The carousel continued its slow, steady rotation, its cheerful music looping endlessly. But something was wrong. No one was riding it. Only a single, tattered stuffed doll lay draped over one of the painted horses, its stitched smile seeming to mock us. I clenched my jaw, a sickening realization settling in. We needed to find the others. And we needed to leave. Near the Ferris wheel, we found Thomas's backpack. Inside, there was an old, yellowed photograph. It was a picture of us as children, posing together in the amusement park. But when I looked closer, my breath hitched. In the corner of the photo, half hidden in the shadows, stood the boy in the blue overalls. His face was just as obscured, just as blurred, that unsettling smile still frozen in place. Did we know this kid? Anna's voice was barely a whisper, trembling at the edges. I stared at the picture, something long buried stirring in the back of my mind. There had been a boy. He had always been there, trailing behind us, hovering on the edges of our games. We had never acknowledged him, never invited him to play. And then, one day, he disappeared, vanished as if he had never existed. We forgot him. I whispered, gripping the photograph so tightly my fingertips turned white. Anna's breath hitched. Are you saying he's still here? I nodded, an inexplicable weight pressing down on my chest. And for the first time, I felt it. A gaze. A burning, unseen presence watching us, standing just out of sight. We need to leave, I said firmly, grabbing Anna's hand and pulling her toward the exit. But the exit was gone. The rusted iron gate we had entered through was nowhere to be seen. In its place stood an old wooden wall, worn and weathered, as if an exit had never existed at all. The amusement park around us began to shift. The carousel's music slowed, distorting into something off-key, its once playful melody warping into a jarring, discordant hum. The Ferris wheel creaked as it turned, and inside each carriage, there were silhouettes, watching. Then, the laughter came again. That same child's laughter. Soft, cold, echoing through the empty night. We shouldn't have come back. I whispered again, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. I tightened my grip on Anna's hand, my pulse hammering in my ears. The amusement park was changing before our eyes. The neon lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows across the ground. The music from the carousel screeched, no longer lighthearted but twisted, warped into something that felt like a warning. We moved quickly toward the Ferris wheel. The ground beneath us felt unsteady, our shadows stretching unnaturally, twisting into shapes that no longer resembled us. Every step felt like wading through thick, suffocating air. Then, Eric. Anna's voice rang out, piercing through the eerie silence. I looked up. At the very top of the Ferris wheel, a figure was swaying, slowly, back and forth. The Ferris wheel turned slowly, its metal frame groaning under the strain of time. As one of the gondolas descended, the figure inside became clearer. It was Eric. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes wide, unblinking. A strange, unnerving smile stretched across his lips. His pale hand lay limply against the window. Anna gasped and lurched forward, but I grabbed her arm before she could run. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay rational. Ever since we had stepped into this amusement park, time had felt warped, as if the past and present were bleeding into each other. Then, a sudden, piercing creak tore through the air as the Ferris wheel jolted, its rusted gears screeching in protest. The sharp noise sent me stumbling back. We turned and ran toward the House of Mirrors. It looked just as it had when we were children, pristine, reflective, its glass walls perfectly polished. But something was off. When I stepped forward, my reflection hesitated for a split second before mirroring my movement. I froze. Each time I took a step, the reflection would lag, just barely, but enough to send a chill crawling up my spine. Dozens of versions of us filled the endless mirrors, our duplicates staring back, their faint smiles barely perceptible. Then, my reflection moved. But I hadn't. Shit. I turned sharply, grabbing Anna's wrist. We needed to get out. But the exit was gone. Instead, there were only more mirrors, reflecting endless, distorted versions of ourselves, trapping us in an impossible maze. And then, that laughter returned. A faint, brittle giggle that sent my stomach twisting into knots. The boy in the blue overalls slowly appeared in the mirrors, his lips parting in a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." I sucked in a sharp breath, yanking Anna along as we stumbled forward, frantically searching for a way out. Behind us, our reflections lagged again. And then, they started to move on their own. Closer. Step by step. Closing in on us. Finally, we burst through the maze's entrance, gasping for breath. And the amusement park had changed. The neon lights had gone dark. The carousel had stopped spinning. The air reeked of decay. "We need to find Thomas and Eric," Anna panted, her voice shaking, tears brimming in her eyes. I exhaled slowly. "We can't keep running in circles. There's a truth here, and we've forgotten it." And suddenly, memories flooded back. That summer. The quiet boy. The one we left behind in the haunted house. It had been a prank. A childish dare. We locked him inside, then snuck away, laughing. But we never let him out. And no one ever spoke of him again. We forgot him. My voice was barely above a whisper, my hands trembling as I reached into my wallet. There, tucked between old receipts and faded bills, was an aged photograph. And in the corner, the boy stood, just as he had before. Eyes hollow. Expression sorrowful. A ghost lingering on the edges of our memories. The ground beneath us rumbled. The carousel's fabric horses slumped forward, their lifeless forms collapsing. The Ferris wheel groaned, its frame twisting as if ready to give way. "Jonas, what do we do?" Anna's voice was barely contained panic. I swallowed hard, gripping the photograph tightly, my fingers tracing the faded ink on the back. "We won't forget you again." The air shifted. For the first time, there was warmth. A presence easing. The boy's silhouette flickered. And then, he was gone. The amusement park crumbled, its walls peeling, its structures decaying back into their long-abandoned state. The colors drained, the illusions faded, and all that remained was a rotting, forgotten ruin. Thomas and Eric lay sprawled nearby, unconscious but breathing. We grabbed them, staggering toward the entrance. And the rusted iron gates stood open before us. Without hesitation, we ran. As soon as we stepped past the threshold, the air changed. The heaviness lifted. The silence settled. We turned back. And the amusement park lay in ruin. No lights. No movement. Just a hollow, abandoned relic swallowed by time. Back in the car, my hands still shook. Anna sat beside me, silent, staring into the distance. "Should we tell the police?" she asked softly. I glanced down at the photograph. The boy was gone. Only the background remained, empty, as if he had never been there at all. "We remember." "That's enough." I tucked the photo back into my wallet, started the engine, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, the Ferris wheel still stood, watching.